What are you predominantly calling it there? I know I referred to ISO the other day because it's such an Aussie Aussie term, but
We have what we call, well, a lot of people are referring to it as shelter in place, but actually the government has clarified it's not shelter in place like you would have, like if there was a bomb threat or something like that, they tell you to shelter in place, so it has kind of a negative connotation. They're saying these are safer at home orders. So they're just encouraging everyone to stay home as much as possible. And it's funny because, you know, here in the United States, there's this obsession with liberty and freedom. That's like a huge part of our national identity. And it, you know, it trickles into the individual consciousness. And so people are feeling like their human rights are incredibly violated, which is really interesting when you zoom out and look at the global perspective and see, you know, I have friends in Rome, in Madrid, and places where they literally had a literal lockdown where there were police monitoring your movements if you wanted to go for essential store runs or something like that. So I think Americans just don't really have any idea how unrestricted we are. You know, like the fact that there's like protests here in the United States is pretty incredible when you look at how, you know, we can still go wherever we want. Nobody's forcing us to stay home. There's no, so it's interesting. What is it like where you guys are in Australia?
Well, maybe we get into that in the share, and just have a chat about what.
Yeah, I think it's probably worthwhile having a chat and exploring both those sort of angles and stuff. So, yeah.
And then Ivy, we just go into a little bit about how you came into the workspace and what you do of being a doula, and how you've been, you know, what's been going on in terms of supporting others through this time. You know, I've read that you also support people through the loss, pregnancy loss as well. You know, I don't know if there's anything there that, you know, we kind of, the Happy Mind came about, Rich and I are both Vedic meditation teachers. And it came about through wanting to, as we can't teach our practice in person through isolation or this lockdown period, it came about trying to just provide a platform for people off the base of meditation and breath work, but also storytelling and just an uplifting vibe, but also the realness of what's going on for people. And so we've had various people on. I think you've had a bit of a look at some of the chats. But, you know, we're not kind of shying away from the realities of the other stuff too. So happy to go into wherever it flows, you know?
Yeah.
Beautiful. And tell me how you two are connected. Are you a couple, or how are you?
No, so even back a step from there, I think, you know, Kai Brown, through tech. So I've known Kai all my life. I grew up with him in Newport on the Sydney's northern beaches. And that's how I met Trek over summer here in Australia when he did his Australian tour through Kai. And then Rich and I did our Vedic teacher training together a couple of years ago. So we're in different parts of Australia right now.
Amazing.
Yeah, so Rich is up near Byron.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world. It's a little bit of a vista.
Oh, breathtaking. Were you very affected by the fires there? I know there were some horrible fires.
Not really, not around here so much, no. The mid coast and south coast definitely it was a lot, but it's been a very crazy period. The last 6 months we've had floods, fires, drought, and now COVID. It's like, wow.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I understand that this is to be expected. If we continue the way we are as a human race, it's going to get worse.
Yeah, definitely.
We're seeing that every year. So here
Yeah.
in California, where I am, it's like we have this annual inferno.
Mm,
And this year, when it happened in October, fortunately for me, I was in New York. And so I was seeing it from the outside. And, you know, from the outside, it looks like the entire state is on fire, which it actually is. So it's like, that's kind of how it looked to us.
yeah.
You know, not being in Australia, it looked like your entire country was on fire.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how adaptable people are. Like, I have people that were actually evacuated, like they were in the evacuation areas. And I was calling them from New York because I was worried about my friends. And it was incredible because they were just like, oh, it was no big deal. We were just out for a couple days and then we got to get
Yeah.
back in. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, we should not be adapting to this. Like, this should not be okay. And
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
We should all be alarmed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, why don't we explore even that sort of stuff as well? Like, we'll kick off, and I'm just a footnote. I have to jump off at 20 past.
Yep.
So
20 past.
so 50 minutes in 50 minutes time.
Perfect. Okay.
Yep. Yep. So Carly, do you want to do the intro, and we'll kickstart it, and we'll explore all those topics again, because I think they're all really relevant, like the fires and all that sort of stuff is super relevant.
And we just keep it super cash. Like, I'll just do an intro here, Ivy, and then it's just like this. We're just chatting, and then that's our style.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are we good, Rich? Have we hit?
Yep. I've hit record.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ivy, for joining Rich and I here at the Happy Mind Project, all the way from LA. Thanks for being here today with us to have a chat on the Conscious Couch. So we just thought we'd invite you in and just hear a little bit about how life's been for you guys over there at the moment, and for you in particular, how your working life's been affected, and as a doula, what's been going on for you in terms of supporting others through this time of lockdown. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you guys.
Thank you. So you're in LA, and how have you been? How's life been looking for you over the last few months?
It's a big change. I mean, I think it's a big change for everybody. And it's really interesting because I feel like it's kind of bringing up how whatever our typical response to stress is, it's kind of magnifying that. So there are people who go into panic mode, who want to know all the news, who get almost like OCD with all the health recommendations and sterilizing everything and isolating themselves. And then there's people who kind of go into denial.
Yeah.
And say like, oh, this is not a big deal. I'm just going to live my life. They're kind of trying as best they can to proceed business as usual and put the rose-colored blinders on. And then you see people who do kind of an interesting combination of what we're seeing in, especially among the spiritual and wellness communities, which I know you're a big meditator, so you're probably seeing this too, is there's this whole conspiracy theory explosion of people who think that they somehow have the inside information, and thanks to the internet you can gather from all these different sources anything to support whatever outrageous ideas are being propagated. So it's really interesting on a psychological level to just see the spectrum of our responses to stress. And I feel like so much of what I do as someone who supports women and couples throughout the childbearing year is support people in down-regulating their nervous systems so that we can start to have more adaptive responses to the stress that's happening, because we're living in a time where this is not totally new. I mean, we've been having pandemics for the last 40 years in increasing intensity. You know, we had SARS, we had MERS, we had now COVID. So there's been a number of these, and the epidemiologists are saying that with our relationship to the ecosystem and the way we're doing chemical agriculture, the way we continue to encroach on wildlife territory, we're going to see these viruses continuing to jump species and affect the global human population. So I think it's a really critical time for us to dive deep and learn how to regulate ourselves so that we can be part of the change not only to survive this time and stay healthy mentally and physically, but also to be part of the solution that our world really needs right now.
It's a really cool point, isn't it? That on a collective, like, 'cause I think we often see ourselves as separate to what's going on the planet. Yeah, as a collective, it's kind of like there's all that disruption, dis-ease of the environment that, is this, Mother Nature's way of recalibrating a little bit and trying to maybe get us a bit more back in tune with the, you know, living within the means of the planet rather than still what human beings have had the tendency to do is to keep overrunning it and, pillaging it as much as possible. So I really like that take that, maybe it's a slight recalibration and hopefully we actually learn, hey, because it seems to be that it's like, the Simpsons episode where Bart keeps sticking his finger in the PowerPoint. Ow, 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 ow. What do you think it'll take for people to, to come back to that attunement that maybe we do live in more alignment with nature?
That would really be the miracle that we need coming through this together. And, that's what I'm hoping happens. I think it's your analogy of Bart Simpson is a really good one. Only I think what a lot of people do is then we numb the pain. We take something to numb it. So we're seeing like an increase in of, alcohol consumption's going up, smoking's going up, all these things, and so, that's one of the reasons why I believe so much in what you guys are doing in your mission, because it's an opportunity to really wake up and rise as a collective.
So I love it. So it's now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how do we feel that sting and hold and go deeper? It's kind of like, I think surfing is kind of a good analogy for everything. And I always think about how when you have a wave coming at you and you're about to get slammed, the solution isn't to just, chill out and pretend like nothing's happening. And it's also not to fight the wave. We need to go deep to come out the other side of this healthy and whole. And so I really think it's a really essential time for us as individuals to do our own inner terrain work that we need to do to be healthy and aligned with ourselves so that we can step out into the collective and really serve in the way that we need to change as a global community.
Because I guess a lot of the work you're actually doing is in transformation, right? Because there's that transformational period of a couple pre any outcome of a child coming into their lives. And as you said, now helping them to down-regulate their stresses so therefore they can experience and go deep. There seems to be a kind of a nice metaphor between what you're saying there with the work you're doing on an individual one-on-one level with people, but then as a whole, if we can still take that same approach. So what do you do with your, newfound parents, especially ones that might first time round that it's maybe freaky and, how do you get them to go into that deeper space where, hey, embrace the uncertainty and increase their adaptability? What do you do for them?
Yeah, well, I think what you just said about embracing the uncertainty is really key, because life is something, especially with the birth of a new life, with pregnancy, with fertility, it's something that in our time, we tend to want to control everything. This is the way the medical model of care has developed over the last century. And the reality is that there's a mystery to the human body. There's a mystery to fertility and a mystery to loss and a mystery to birth that if we don't make peace with inside ourselves and surrender ourselves to, we're going to be at the mercy of. And it's going to be a really stressful, emotionally taxing journey if we don't get right with that reality. And so, when I work with couples in the preconception process, that's one of the first things we do is look at, okay, what are the pieces that you can control? And what are the pieces that are to really be let go of and to relax around? So the timing of conception is one of those things, obviously. Loss is one of those things that no matter how much we do, I would say easily the majority of pregnancy losses are cause unknown. That's the majority. No matter how many tests we run, no matter what kind of technologies and interventions we involve. And so we are being asked to look deeper into a wisdom that has really withstood the test of time since the beginning of time. Really, prior to the medical model of care, birth and fertility and medicine as a whole was in the hands of women. They were these medicine women that were female healers. And they had extremely advanced systems of medicine and knowledge of herbology that were actually very effective at that time. This was hundreds of years ago. And simultaneously in the United States and Europe, these women, the midwives, the medicine women and the healers, were hanged and tried as witches. They were burned at the stake as witches. And so that corresponded with the rise in Western medical schools that admitted only male doctors. And so what we're seeing today is this paradigm of the medical model of care, which I don't want to villainize, because the medical model of care is excellent when it comes to emergencies. If you have a dismembered limb, or if you need a surgical intervention, you belong in the medical model of care. But the problem is it's become really imbalanced and divorced from a whole other way of knowing that is just as valid and deep. And that aspect of ourselves is the part of ourselves that connects us with nature. And so that's one of the most important things I do when I begin working with a mother-to-be or a new mom or a couple, is connecting them with their own innate wisdom, which lives inside of each of our bodies. And how do we access that when we have been really disconnected from it for generations? And so one of the best tools for that is meditation, embodiment practices, and connecting with nature. I really see miracles happen when people just go outside and literally put their feet on the earth. And the ability for that to unwind even the most deeply seated stress and anxiety is really incredible to see.
It's pretty simple, hey?
Yeah. We've made it very complicated, but
there's a lot of work to undo, isn't there?
What's that?
There's a lot of work to undo, and a lot of like samskaras and emotional conditioning and fear-based ways of living to undo in order to have this connection to self, and then to surrender to, nature taking care when we give birth and everywhere in our lives. I think a lot of people go into that medical-based system from my experience, because they don't trust their innate self, their inner self. And so they go in because these people can take care of them. They don't have that inner, guidance system to say, hey, I can just surrender to this process. It's a beautiful natural process, and there's support around me. That's so much fear-based to just let the medical system take over rather than trust.
I think that's probably also been, wholly put down to the way it's all been, I won't say marketed, but that we've all been programmed to believe that that's what we do. You get a cold, you go see doctor, you get this, you go see doctor. But as you're saying, Ivy, the body's got such an innate wisdom within inside itself, and that I've read that, I can't remember where it was, that 90% of all diseases are self-limiting given the right environment, and the environment of stress and anxiety in the modern world, disconnection from nature, probably isn't going to necessarily assist in that removal of those diseases. And that's why that medical system is so propped up, because when we are continually so stressed and anxious, it's hard for our body to do what's right to do. And as you said, just those simple practices of putting your feet in the ground and breathing, coming back to removing stress, and the body can go, oh, I can heal. It's crazy. So how's it going for you with obviously all these limitations and restrictions, with your, obviously people are still having babies. Are you able to facilitate and help right now, or do they have to go to the medical system in order to have their children at the moment?
Well, it depends on what their birth plan is. So families who are delivering in the hospital, I then support them remotely. So what I and my doula partners will do is be in communication with them when they first go into labor, sometimes we'll actually go to their home and support them through early labor, because what a lot of couples are wanting to do is avoid going into the hospital when it's too early. You know, they want to really wait until they need to be there to deliver, just to minimize exposure. And it's always a good idea to not go in too early, because then there's less of a chance of having unnecessary interventions that can lead to a cesarean birth that they ultimately say was necessary, but it became necessary because these interventions caused complications that led the labor down that path. So that's a really key part of what I do, is support the laboring mother at home as long as possible. And I currently, the way COVID has really changed my practice is that now I'm working with more clients remotely all over the country and all over the world.
Yeah, wow.
Whereas before, I would say the majority of my practice was local here in LA. But because there just isn't skilled doula support in many areas, more and more families are reaching out to me for advice, because a lot of people have been questioning their birth plan. And there's been a huge surge in families switching from hospital birth to home birth, because they just want to avoid that unnecessary exposure to the coronavirus. But if they are delivering in a hospital, we will help them decide when it's that right moment to go in. And then once they check into the hospital, we support them remotely. So we can be right there on Skype or Zoom or FaceTime. Most of my clients are able to have their partner with them still, but you've probably seen the news that in some parts of the country, at some hospitals, they're not allowing partners into the delivery room. Yeah, and that's to minimize, it actually seems to be less for the mother herself and more for the hospital staff, limiting their exposure and likelihood, because, you know, with each individual person, you increase the chance of exposure until our testing capacity improves.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if a mother is tested positive for COVID, then she has to be separated from her partner, and in some cases separated from her baby as well. So that's a really tragic experience that a lot of people are going through right now.
Wow.
Too, is that separation.
Yeah.
How are you helping navigate that? Because I can imagine would be those first couple of hours and minutes of bonding must be hard for the mother to not get that connection.
Yeah. Well, a huge part of what I do with my clients is education. And one of the first things that we look at is something called informed consent rights, which is a law. And it governs all of medicine, whether you're going in for a elective surgery or, you know, also applies to birth, which basically means that in all cases, and this includes emergency cases where the mother or baby are deemed to be medically at risk, you have a right to what's called informed consent refusal, which basically means you can say no to anything they're suggesting. And not a lot of people know this. And even the people that know this have a really hard time asserting this for themselves. And this is something that I'm really passionate about, because it's nobody's baby but yours. It's your baby, it's your body.
Yeah.
And so claiming that sovereignty, I think, is a huge part of the paradigm shift back into self-trust. So that we're not just, when we enter a hospital, surrendering our bodies and surrendering our children to whatever the hospital says. Now, this is a really delicate balance, particularly in situations as grave as the situation we're facing right now with the pandemic, because I never want to encourage someone to be at odds with their medical provider. So really the support I offer goes back a few steps before that, which is making sure that when you choose a provider, they're aligned with your wishes and the needs of your family for your birth. And that can be very challenging to tease out, because a lot of doctors talk a good talk and they seem like very nice people, and they might be the most well-intentioned, kind-hearted people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their philosophy and the way they practice medicine is going to be supportive of your vision for your birth and the kind of bonding that you want to experience for your child. So that's one of the things that we really have to unpack far before labor time. so that by the time these decisions arise, we already know that this is a doctor who gets the kind of experience we're wanting and the kind of parent we want to be, because the choices you make in labor and pregnancy are the first parenting decisions you make. And like you said, this is a really critical bonding time. It's a time that psychologists are discovering now is even more impactful than those first 2 years of life, is those first couple hours after birth. So to answer your question with COVID specifically, one of the things I'm encouraging if a mother is positive is to advocate to still be able to breastfeed and have skin to skin. And if you really advocate for it, there are hospitals that are allowing this, even in the case of positive mothers, where the mother will be masked and gloved and, you know, fully scrubbed up as if you were scrubbing up for surgery, but the baby can still get that essential skin to skin contact and breastfeed, because they're seeing that the virus does not transfer through breast milk, which is really a huge blessing.
Oh, that's great. That's going to be my next question.
Yeah, there's other hospitals that unfortunately aren't really as progressive that way, and they're enforcing separation and taking the baby either to the nursery or causing the baby to have to be 6 feet apart in the same room with the mom, which is just a nightmare from an attachment perspective in terms of what's going on in this child's physiology and neurological development, knowing, you know, because the baby, when a baby's born, it doesn't know that it's separate from the mom. And so if you are in that same room and can hear your mother's voice and sense her presence and you have no contact, I could just see that being a real problem down the line. So the families that I work with were really being proactive in making sure that they're able to get the bonding however they can.
Yeah, it's critical, huh?
Huh.
Yeah.
And in terms of loss, just out of interest, when you said, Ivy, regarding the separation in the hospital room, when it comes to loss and stillbirth, here in Australia, I know my girlfriend went through this, and they have the stillborn child in the room for up to a couple of days to mourn that process. Is that the same in the States? What goes on there?
It really depends. The stillbirths that I've attended, usually it's just a couple hours that they'll spend with the child and then they take them away. I think it's a great idea to spend really good, solid time with your baby. So I always encourage my families to do that and to have some kind of a ritual. I think, you know, even for people that aren't religious, as human beings, we've evolved to really benefit from the ritual process psychologically and emotionally. And so I really encourage talking to the baby, holding the baby for both moms and partners. It can make a huge, huge difference in the healing process from loss.
And do you prep the people that you work with in the event that occurs? Do you prep people? Do you talk about loss?
Sometimes. I mean, it's a tricky thing because in pregnancy, oftentimes loss is unexpected. So in pregnancies where we know there's a fetal anomaly, like I've worked with families that knew for months that there was a potential problem. So they got the test results at 10 weeks. They wanted to wait, you know, till 15 or 16 weeks to confirm with an amniocentesis. Then they wanted to wait even longer to confirm with the 20-week anatomy scan. So by that point, you've known for several months that there was a potential for a problem that may require termination, or that may be something that's recommended. And so in those cases, there's a lot of time to prepare and unpack the layers. And so we definitely do all of that. In other cases, it's usually not something that I would bring up in a typical pregnancy that doesn't have any signs of abnormality, only because it's a time when I think most moms really want to be supported just in finding that peace and calming any anxieties they have. And so we kind of cross that bridge when we come to it. And I've definitely had losses that were totally unexpected and unforeseen, late-term losses. And in that case, we just have to kind of like go right into the moment and resource ourselves as best we can in those moments. But I think that all the tools that we use to prepare for birth are tools that also apply to loss, because it's all about connecting with self on a really deep level and surrendering. And that's what we need, whether it's a live birth or a baby born still.
Yeah.
And that's probably suitably relevant
I'm
to...
on the phone, sweetie. I can't talk to you right now. Sorry.
That's all right. How old is that, your young child?
Yeah, she's 5.
Oh, very cute. I was going to say, that seems like a relevant to switch gears a little bit and come back to, I guess, a COVID scenario is those concepts that you just touched on, surrender. You know, because I think we touched on before the interview started that over there at the moment, there's a lot of, and I guess it's everywhere, there seems to be some really crazy divisions going on. And you guys are still, you know, someone just mentioned today, like lockdown, or not lockdown, whatever you call it. What do you guys call it over there again?
They're calling it safer at home.
So, yep.
And it's really interesting how, like you were saying, like how differently people interpret that, because there's a lot of Americans that are still calling it lockdown, and I have to kind of, you know, remind, even in my friend circle, I'm like, why don't you talk to some people in Rome or in, you know, some of these places in Europe where they legitimately have a police lockdown situation? That is not what we're having here, but they're still calling it any manner of things, from lockdown to shelter in place, which is what here in the States we call, if there's like a bomb threat, they'll say to shelter in place. But the stay at home or safer at home orders are pretty distinct from that. They're just saying that they're encouraging people, for the sake of public health, to stay at home as much as possible, is what's happening here.
And is that lightening up at all? Is there any change on that front? Is it sort of getting better, or is it, from some reports, it seems like it's getting worse? Like what's like happening over there?
Well, the United States is a big country. You know, if you put together pretty much all the countries in Europe and squash them together, that's kind of what we're dealing with here in terms of all the different states. So it really depends on where you are. Yeah. Where my brother lives, in New York City, you know, you probably saw on the news, it was similar to what they were seeing in Milan. I mean, they were running out of body bags. They were having to house corpses in refrigerated trucks. It was, you know, really dire for several weeks, with thousands of deaths daily. I haven't been staying on top of the news as much lately, just because I had to kind of start to limit that, just for my own wellness. So there, I don't expect the safer at home orders to be lifting anytime soon, although I think also they consider that to have peaked at some point in April. So hopefully they're saying that now the death rates are going down and the hospital system is kind of catching up to be able to keep up with the number of cases coming in. Here in LA, my understanding is we have some of the highest number of cases in the whole state of California. So I think kind of like LA, New York, San Francisco, maybe Miami are the peak. I know Detroit was hit pretty hard. So there's a lot of places, like Georgia is completely opening back up. Certain cities in Georgia, I should say. Some people are saying that that's premature and that we should expect a spike. Yeah. I know one of the top doctors who's advising the White House is saying that we're going to expect a second wave in the fall, which is really scary. So I think in California, we're taking a pretty conservative approach. And I just read a Los Angeles Times article today saying that we should expect safer at home orders to remain in place for the next 3 months. And they're hoping to slowly start to relax them based on the data coming in.
So is that across the board, school kids, and are schools fully closed as well over there?
Yeah, schools are fully closed. My understanding is that schools anywhere from like pre-K all the way up to the university level are definitely going to be closed until the fall. I think some university classes might be starting back in the summer. But I think Los Angeles Unified School District, I'm pretty sure, is closed until the fall. So
I've,
yeah, a lot of the parents I work with are having a lot of stress over that too, because some of them are still having to work from home, and then you have 2 little kids you're having to watch 24/7 and can't necessarily have childcare. So it's taking all the tools, and it's, you know, it's also really taking its toll on relationships. I've had a lot of people joke to me that I'm going to be really busy, you know, come October, because there's going to be this like baby boom because everybody's just staying at home and making love. And I hope that's the case, but I'm also seeing, you know, I'm getting the calls of really stressed out parents that are like, we can't even think about sex. We're just trying to like hold it together.
Yeah. Because stress and sex don't go too well together.
Yeah, and I think a lot of couples, even people without kids, you know, I think we're not used to being together 24/7, which is nice for a couple weeks. And then it's kind of like, you know, I think for a lot of relationships, it depends on that movement of come together, have individual personal space to individuate, and then come back together. And so when you eliminate that exhale, it can feel like a lot and be very confronting.
Hyperventilating.
What's that?
Hyperventilating.
Yeah, I think it probably feels like that for some couples. I actually ran into a policeman the other day on one of my walks. And I didn't have a mask on, so I almost like thought he was going to stop me. It was that weird kind of like awkward thing of like, am I doing something wrong? I'm not, you know, I haven't really been up with the local news. And he just smiled. So I thought, okay, I'm not in trouble. And I asked him, I said, are you very busy these days? I was wondering, like, I had assumed maybe kind of crime would be going down with fear of the pandemic. And he said, yeah, actually, we haven't been getting many calls except domestic violence calls.
Same here.
He said those have been through the roof. And another friend of mine's a divorce attorney, and she said her phone's been running off the hook. So I think midwives, divorce attorneys, like they're sadly, divorce attorneys are.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of those unfortunate circumstances, which is, you know, not, again, I think if we reflect on, and again, how they change it, it's probably a bit too late, but the fact that, you know, alcohol sales are through the roof, people are stuck at home, they're not getting that breath time apart. And for anyone that with that potentiality for domestic violence situations, it's kind of like just a bit of kerosene on the fire, which is a real challenge. So hopefully people can, you know, navigate that as well as possible.
Rich, I didn't hear that last part of what you said. You said, say that last part again.
Just hopefully people can learn to navigate that as well as possible. And that it's one of those challenging situations. How can we change that? I said with alcohol sales through the roof and all that sort of, you know, it's that tinderbox environment when we're stuck at home, and throw in, you know, alcohol sales. I read up to nearly 75% increase in sales. Which is kind of crazy and scary in those situations for people that don't, I guess, have those tools, and alcohol is their only way to release stress. It's kind of a scary concept, but that aside, it's interesting over here. It's interesting to hear what you're saying, Ivy, because over here we're kind of almost switching gears totally now, where our kids are back at schools. There's been very little to case. It's really foreign in a way. Like, life hasn't seemed to have changed too much, other than the fact that we can't go to work and do what we normally do, but there's people at the beaches, there's surfing, there's all sorts of stuff going on. So it's kind of like you'd be really removed from it. I think that's where, especially some of the information which people are reading online, like, it's fascinating to see that, you know, this, I guess, a disbelief that there is something really happening, or maybe it's not really happening, because we can be like, I don't know about you, Carly, down there, but from where I am, I see now, like, for the first few weeks, there's people wearing masks and stuff, but now, maybe I was down at the farmers markets this morning, I saw one person out of probably 200 or 300 that had a mask on, and, you know, it seems to be life's getting back to normal. So it's really interesting to hear that over there it's still so heightened, and
yeah, we certainly haven't been hit as hard. We've been very fortunate, but you know, we have to be careful to manage it too, because I think it's psychologically, if we go through another wave where we have to go back in, and the same with you, Ivy, over there, if they start to lift things and ease things, and then there's another wave of the COVID virus hitting, and people, get forced back into lockdown. I'm concerned for people about how to cope with that. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it all lifts and unfolds. And obviously there's still the aftermath of even the shock of this for a lot of people psychologically, So yeah, I guess that's why we're doing what we're doing online, and, having these conversations to help support people and have share and have very real conversations about what they need to do to cope. So it's lightning. It's certainly lightning in Sydney, like just the last few days of the children starting to go back to school. It almost feels energetically a bit chaotic outside, like people are racing around a bit too much, when we still are, restrictions still are in place, but we'll see.
So I guess, like, as the concept of a happy mind, what are your strategies that you're personally using during this stage, and that you'd advise other? Like, do you have like some practices or stuff that you go, okay, how can I remain happy, positive, and adaptive during this time? What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, when this first kind of all hit, it's funny because I had taken news off my phone, months prior. I don't really keep up on that. I kind of check in once a week with my major sources. I listen to NPR and I look at BBC and I glance at headlines, but I had no idea what was about to hit Los Angeles the day it did. And I remember exactly where I was, because I was in the grocery store and I was thinking, why are all these people in the grocery store? Like, it looked like the end of the world. There were people just taking the entire shelves down, and I'm going, what is going on? And I was in line, this like giant line, and I got the call to a birth. I was called to a birth, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna put all this back and go to the birth. And it was, after that, the next day, that I found out the enormity of all of this. And pretty much over the following week, I realized how dramatically my practice was going to have to shift. Everything was going remote. It just, doulas weren't being allowed in hospitals anymore. These were like big, big changes. Restaurants obviously were closing down. Gyms were closing down. Kind of anything we do to connect and regulate ourselves was taken off the table. And so the first thing I did personally was go into one of my personal practices that holds me together, which is sacred dance. And I have this incredible teacher that I've been fortunate to work with. She was offering classes every day online through that entire month of April. And so that was such a huge lifeline for me. Her name is Banafsheh Sayad, and she does this Persian sacred dance that originates from some of the Sufi wisdom. So it's very connected to this aspect of surrender and connecting with love energy and our bodies. But it's interesting because as much as that feeds me personally, that's kind of one of my personal core practices, I was finding it just wasn't enough. Like, I would have to do that, and then I'd have to do another practice later in the day, and it like still wasn't enough. And so now what I've kind of come to through all of that is like, we need to be in practice, or I'll speak for myself. Like, I'm needing to treat every single moment of the day as an opportunity to practice, whether I'm doing my dishes, whether I'm connecting with you guys, whether I'm taking a walk outside. It's like my opportunity to really open my eyes and feel my breath. And darling, I'm still on the phone, love. I know you're sad about that. She wants me to go dance with her. I'll be out in a minute, sweetie.
Oh, shame.
I dance with her outside every day, and so I guess she knows it's our usual time, and she's sitting outside with me. So, and that's frankly one of my practices, is going outside and dancing with this sweet 5-year-old neighbor. We just get in the grass and we turn on music and we celebrate life. I think we have to take every opportunity for that, because as much as people are turning to some unhealthy coping mechanisms, like you mentioned with alcohol, I always see that as the symptom. It's never the problem. The problem isn't alcohol. The problem is, how can we regulate ourselves in a way that is bringing us back to ourselves, so that when an emotional trigger comes up, we're able to meet it with compassion and grace and centeredness inside ourselves, and not be in that kind of fight or flight mode.
Beautiful. That was, yeah, I really related to what you said there, Ivy. I think it's just when you're on your own so much, and you're at home through this time, just to really be in the moment, whether it is work for a moment or taking yourself into the garden, or it's just staying so connected and maintaining balance and keeping your practices up, so that you remain in a space that can support yourself as well as support others. And I was just thinking, I'm always walking around with my cup of tea. My kids think that they laugh at me all the time because I've always got a cup of tea in my hand. But even when I sit down to do an hour of, admin work in my computer, I've got this beautiful cup of tea there. And that just kind of supports me through just getting that done. And it's just, there's so many little things that can be done to just keep the nervous system regulated, so that we can operate from our highest self, really. So that was beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. In trauma work, we call that resourcing. Like you're saying, like with the cup of tea, like knowing what it is for you that brings you into that state of comfort. And even if you can't find a pleasurable experience in any given moment, that might be too big a leap. What can you find that's pleasant or neutral?
Yeah.
So it might be flowers on your desk. It might be hearing the birds chirp out of the window.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Ivy.
To be with us. It was such an honor to have you share this time with us today.
I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You when you can make it out to Australia sometime, when that day comes.
Oh, that would be such a delight. It's a place I've always wanted to come visit. It's definitely at the top of my list.
Oh, the sun's coming through your window now.
I know. I'm feeling backlit in a really magical way at the moment. It's a couple hours from setting here.
Perfect timing. Well, thanks so much, Ivy, and keep up doing that amazing work you're doing. Keep spreading the love.
Likewise, you guys. Yeah, thank you.
Alrighty, see you guys.
Thanks so much. Take care. Enjoy your dancing.